And welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. I am joined today by Jason Caldwell, recording this here on a nice Memorial Day evening, and it is now the end of May, and Auburn basketball, as of just a couple days ago, I guess it was yesterday now, on Sunday, that they finally finished their roster for the 2024-25 season. Bruce Pearl said it last week. He said, I usually am not used to recruiting this late into the offseason, but it's just kind of the way things go. And Jason, after a bunch of different guys, I mean, this was an extensive transfer board for them at a couple different positions. They end up taking not a point guard. They don't take a true point guard. That was something Bruce Pearl mentioned could be the case. Their final piece of the roster is Miles Kelly, a Georgia Tech transfer who comes in after leading the Yellow Jackets in scoring for the last two seasons. And Bruce Pearl said it last week. He said, look, we could take a point guard, we could take a 2, we could take a 2/3, we could take a 1/2. We'll get into that a little bit and why this backcourt is so versatile. But simply put, Jason, I mean, KD Johnson did a lot of great things for this program, particularly on defense. But in terms of an offensive output, if your two position right now is Denver Jones and Miles Kelly, you've done a really, really good job. And I think now you look at this sort of foursome that they have in the backcourt with those 2-point guards, and we'll see what happens with Pettiford. We'll see what position he kind of plays. But and then Kelly and Denver Jones as well. They've done a really good job of reloading this backcourt.
Yeah, I think first, I think Pettiford's probably going to have to play point at some point. Maybe it's a 5-minute stretch. I don't think it's going to look like what we saw last year when people think about, well, where are those other minutes going to come from the point guard position? I think JP Pegues is going to be a guy that plays 32 minutes a game. I think it's going to be a couple of minutes here, a couple of minutes there. So I think Denver Jones, Todd Pettiford, those guys could get you that, hey, maybe there's a game where you have to play 15 minutes. But I think it's going to be more like, 8 to 10 minutes. But you look at Miles Kelly and Nathan, we just haven't seen many guys like this for Bruce Pearl and Auburn. We haven't seen a true 6'5", 6'6" guard. I mean, we've seen guys that have played the position, but weren't necessarily guys that you go, oh, those guys this guy's a guard. He can handle it. Can shoot. Slasher. He's not a big body guy, but he's long. I think the most intriguing thing I see is that see a guy that looks like he's continuing to develop in shooting the basketball from the perimeter. And you come to now a system where you're going to have some freedom to do those things. I really like it. I think it's a really interesting mix when you talk about this. And then you talk about this roster has the potential to be a really, really big group at times on the court, especially if you have Denver at the point guard. But JP Pegues isn't small. I mean, he's not a small guy. But you think about potentially having a 6'6" guard and Chad Baker-Mazar at the 3. What if you slide Broom down to the 4 and play him and Dylan Cardwell? I mean, like, that's a massive group of guys on the court for Auburn, and far cry from what we've seen in the past. So, yeah, I like the makeup this guard group. You brought in some depth at key spots. You get some key guys back. Now see how all the gumbo comes together this summer, because, and again, you've got a lot of new faces, and so it's just something that everybody deals with. Everybody has to do it. Bruce Pearl's done it better than most in how you put all those pieces together. But I do like the group of parts, as we stand today.
Yeah, like we mentioned, I mean, there was a lot of different options. There was a lot of different ways they could have gone in the backcourt. We got on this podcast like 3 weeks ago, and we were talking about Duke Miles like that was a done deal because he had, was a Montgomery kid and he had just finished his visit and didn't have anywhere else to go. And we were talking about that possibility. Jordan Ivy Curry from UTSA is a guy who didn't even come to campus because he committed to UCF while he was there. And so, sort of a winding road for them. And we'll talk a little bit about their front court addition as well. But the end result, I think, is
I like it.
It's pretty good.
I like it. I like it better than the pieces that they would have potentially gotten earlier, because I do think you're going to have a point guard that's going to play 30-plus minutes. I think this is a more valuable piece, especially when you add the size. So I think they came out maybe I think it's better than it would have been had they gotten Duke Miles originally. I think this is a better piece and a better fit for this roster.
Yeah, both Miles Kelly and Jaheim Hudson from SMU that we will talk about. Continuing to recruit that Atlanta area, kind of like guys who are around that place. I mean, Hudson talked about it with you after his visit, saying like being in Georgia and playing high level basketball because he played at Wheeler, like played with Isaiah Collier, is really, really high level program. Like they saw in Georgia the rise of Auburn basketball. Miles Kelly's a guy from Lilburn, so like he's obviously been around it and seen that. Like I mentioned, 2 years leading Georgia Tech in scoring. Last year, 13.9 points per game, 32% from beyond the arc. He was 36% in conference play. So that obviously that matters a little bit more. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of tools for him offensively. There's some to be desired. He's not a perfect player. His shooting percentages were a little bit low, but his usage rate was also really, really high. Like he was their guy whenever he had the ball in his hands. I was reading some stuff about him last year. Damon Stoudemire, who was their first year coach, Georgia Tech, apparently he made a lot of improvements defensively, made a lot of really big strides defensively in that system. Offensive game dipped a little bit, but still a guy who can absolutely fill it up. And so, like you said, it's interesting because they're not used to having a 6'6" guy playing there in the backcourt. We mentioned Todd Pettiford, and I wrote about it last week when we talked to BP. Like he had sort of already hinted at this. There's so much flexibility in that backcourt because, I mean, Pegues is really the only guy who's restricted to one spot. And I say that because Bruce brought it up like unprompted. He said, you might see Denver Jones move around a little bit.
Yeah.
That was a hint. That was a hint that, hey, we might not bring in. So I think that goes back to your point. Like, yes, Todd Pettiford will play point guard this year. Will he play that exclusively? Probably not. But he will have a role at point guard. Bruce Pearl has said we think he's too explosive. We want him off the ball right away. Also, he's 5'10" though, and he's the number 2 point guard in the country for a reason. Like he's going to probably long term be point guard. But Bruce also brought up Denver Jones, and so I think that's how you solve this by saying you get a starting caliber guy at the 2. Now you take your starting 2 and you give him some minutes at the 1. Maybe it's just one rotation, and maybe it fizzles out by the time SEC play starts. Maybe you're like, okay, Tahad's ready. Like he's ready to be the backup point guard. But it's going to be an interesting next 4 or 5 months to just see how that sort of progresses because they have so many different options with what they want to do with that rotation.
Yeah, again, once again, it's another roster where you look and you go, well, they got 12 guys, 10, 11. What kind of rotation can you get out of this? And I don't think it's going to be quite like it was last year. Last year was more plug and play. Last year where it was, well, this guy comes out, this guy goes in, and you play the same way. I don't know that we'll see that with this roster. I think it may be a little bit different style of play depending on who it is and depending on kind of what you're doing. I mentioned you could go really big at times. There's some different things I think you could do with this roster, but when you look at it, Kelly, I think there's 2 things. I think one of them is you get to Auburn. I believe him and Chad Baker-Mazar guys. They're going to go, hey, look, we want you to get bigger and stronger to play in this league. And Chad found it out last year. Miles Kelly's played in the ACC, and it's a really good basketball league. But I still think there's some physicality that he could add to his game that would change maybe the style of play for him and the things he does. And so I could see that being a priority. Obviously, Todd Pettiford, Ja'Kai Howard are guys that are going to have that coming from high school ranks to getting here. They're going to have to improve. So I think that's a focus for some of this roster in the summer is going to be, hey, we need you to get stronger and to be more physical and to get prepared for what life's like in the Southeastern Conference. And I think even an older guy like Miles Kelly can do some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret. Like that's what Bruce brought up. Was the first individual player talking about is like, yeah, we want Chad to bulk up. I mean, when we talked to Chad when he did that interview with us last month or couple months ago about coming back, he said, one of the biggest things is getting bigger and stronger. Bruce Pearl views him as a pro. He's talked about that over and over again because when you're 6'7" and you can shoot the ball and you're committed to playing good defense, like you are a desirable professional prospect at the wing spot. But if you're obviously that lanky, that's going to cause issues. And so it didn't cause a bunch of issues for him last year, but at that 3 spot, like you're going to draw so many elite matchups because like that's where some really athletic players play in the SEC. The other transfer addition that I don't think we've talked about since we've done a podcast. It's now last week, is Jaheim Hudson from SMU. This is another sort of winding road they took. You had RJ Godfrey from Clemson, didn't get on campus, ends up going to Georgia. You had Acre from, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah.
From Samford, different factors, also did not end up on campus. You get Dylan Mitchell, the guy that you were pretty much the number 2 for out of high school, former 5-star guy, and he ends up committing to Cincinnati after he visits Auburn. And so it was an interesting situation because later that day, like Mitchell left and then Jaheim Hudson came in for a visit. And I think, Jason, once they got, to this 4th, 5th round of trying to bring in transfer forwards and looking at different guys, I think they got Hudson on campus. Bruce got to look at him in person and sort of talk to him. And I think they were done at that point. They're like, we're not going to do this anymore. We think this guy fits really well. And the thing about Hudson is he was a true backup at SMU. This is not a guy that's going to come in here. Now, could he start? Absolutely, sure. But like, they're expecting Chaney Johnson to be the guy at the 4. And you can expand on a little bit more from talking to him and seeing him, but like the opportunity seemed like it was not lost on Jaheim Hudson, just sort of reading some of his comments saying like, it's a dream to even be in a position to have this opportunity to play at Auburn. And so again, I got another guy from kind of the Atlanta area. I am interested to see what that 1-2 punch looks like at the 4 position. Those are 2 very, very different players. Maybe their measurables are pretty similar. Chaney and Jaheim Hudson, 2 very, very different play styles in terms of a power forward.
Yeah, I think it's the most important question mark and the biggest question mark for this roster heading into next year is what does that position look like? Does Chaney Johnson step up and because here's the thing, from a scoring standpoint, you would not expect that position to have to provide a ton of scoring punch when you think about what you brought back and what you have at certain spots. When you think about obviously Janai Broom on one end and Denver Jones on the other end, and J.P. Pegues has been a guy, and Chad Baker-Mazar, and now you've added in, Miles Kelly. I mean, like there's some scoring punch on this roster. Can those guys be physical, withstand it, rebound, do those things? Jaheim Hudson has done that, and that's what he's done. He's been that guy. I think if you come up this time next year and you say, hey, that you got 10 points, 10 rebounds a game from the power forward position, you'd feel pretty darn good. Like that's what you averaged, and you got consistent play out of that. I think that's all you need. Now, Chaney Johnson's a guy that can give you more than that, but Jaheim Hudson's a big physical guy. I think probably 6'7", 225 or so. I think he's going to be a rebounder. And the interesting thing for him is that he does probably feel like I got a chance to compete. Chaney Johnson's a guy that played some minutes last year, but that's not a guy you look at and go, man, that's not Janai Broom that they're competing with. And Chaney's a guy that's going to be a good player. But there's an opportunity to go out there and go, hey, I'm going to go show you what I can do. And so I think it sets up to create a little competition there. Like you said, 2 similar body styles, but I think Jaheim Hudson is a true interior guy, whereas Chaney Johnson's a guy that I think to run the court, athleticism, do the things he does. And if Chaney, we talked about it with Miles Kelly, I think for him, can he take the next step shooting the basketball? That's going to be the key for him. The athleticism's there, doing those things. If he can step out and make shots, we saw it be the difference for Jalen Williams, stepping out, making shots. You do that because the floor is going to open up with Broom and these guys. You're going to have plenty of opportunities. Because if you do that and you add a little bit more scoring punch at power forward, then this team is going to be pretty hard to slow down offensively.
I was talking about it with Justin Ferguson yesterday, and the thing about Chaney is, and I'm big on Chaney's potential, just from being around him and seeing how he progressed last year. I don't think people realize like how I think he was shooting 52% from 3 over his last like 12 games or something like that, and just a really, really hyper efficient player. And they obviously think highly of him within the program, and you talk to any of his teammates, it's like his athletic ability is insane. However, if this ends up being your weakest position out of the 5, which somebody has to be, one of them has to be. If it ends up being your weakest, let's say even Miles Kelly off the bench, you want him to give that scoring. So there's 5 guys. if you're saying Chaney Johnson is like your number 6 scoring option on this team, and it's Chaney Johnson, like you're in a that's pretty darn good. Like if he is your number 6 guy, I think he has the potential to be higher than that. So it'll be interesting. I mean, that is, I think, the one spot on the roster where, and I understand, and look, they went after some higher profile guys, and we would be having different conversations if they brought in Acre because he was a first team all conference, very different type of player, somebody who could absolutely have been the starter. We would be having different kinds of conversations. I think that is the only one, like you said, that's Chaney's progression and what they do with that 4 spot, how it progresses going into the year is one of the most interesting parts about this team, because I don't know about you, but I mean, I think everywhere else, there's really no question they either improved or they brought back the same guys, which when you do that in college basketball, that's an improvement because most people lose players pretty often. So like, I think at all 4 other spots, you're feeling even better than you did last season. So that 4 spot is the only one where you're kind of looking and saying, okay, that progression, I think the summer is going to be, it's going to be really important. And Bruce said it. He said, look, in summer, we just need to get Chaney the ball in his hands more often. Say, go out there, be aggressive, play free, see what that looks like, and then go kind of mold from there.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like you go, where do the touches come from? I think you have to make it a priority to give him some touches to develop some of those things. And you're right. I mean, you think about this roster and go, the Broom, you're where you were. With Denver Jones, you're where you were. With Chad Baker-Mazara, you're where you were. JP McGeese, you're better than you were. And you go, okay, power forward. Can you get to, as a combination, can you get to where you were last year? You may not have to get there, but if you do, then that's a pretty good spot to be in.
Yeah, and I do wonder too, and this is, I mean, kind of a tangent, but Bruce was saying, it's twofold with Pettiford not wanting to, because I mean, this is a big talking point for him about like, he's not a point guard. We're not going to pigeonhole him at point guard. I mean, he has been on that for the past several months. And, it's kind of twofold. He talked about he's a really explosive off the ball guy. And I think that second unit is going to be talking about him and Miles Kelly and like Dylan Cardwell rim running with those guys. I mean, that could be a really fun second group off the bench. Yeah, just go. And they did that last year. And that's why that group was deadly, is because Trey Donaldson was so good at that. Just get out there and push. And so, but it's also been, Jason, I think people, positionless basketball is something Bruce kind of prides himself on. But people are, get kind of stuck on, is he a point guard, whatever. It's been a while since they've had a really good ball handling too. And if he comes off the bench and at any point Pettiford is, you have 2 guards, it doesn't really matter who they are, Kelly, Pettiford, whatever. If these guys can handle the ball, they can bring the ball up the floor and they can run the offense, doesn't really matter where they're at. And that goes for the 3 spot as well. I mean, you could go small ball and you could put Miles Kelly at the 3, or Chad Baker-Mazara. You're facing a small team, you put him at the 4, and you've just got a deadly shooting lineup out there with guys who can shoot the ball. They have so many different options. And I agree with you. Last year it seemed, and guys were different because like Donaldson would come off for Holloway. They were very different. Cardwell and Broom were very different.
Yeah, but you did the same things.
But it was 1-to-1. And then Leo Berman or Chris Moore was like the 11th guy you punch in there. This seems like it could really be different from group to group, and that's why it's going to be an exciting team to watch, I think, just because they can come at you. I think probably, again, we're a long way from the season, but it seems like a lot of different ways this Auburn team will be able to succeed.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's going to be key for them. And like I said, this summer will be really important. Ja'Kai Howard, we haven't talked about much, but he's a ton of scoring punch in some of these overtime elite games and doing the things he's done. And if he can continue to develop and shoot the basketball, his athleticism through the roof now. I mean, this guy is incredible athlete. So you're talking about a second group. If you have him at the 3 potentially and playing with that group, and you have 2 6'6" guys in on the wings, Todd Pettiford, Dylan Cardwell, Gene Mutz. I mean, that's a prolific group. So I mean, there's a lot of development, but I think a lot of really intriguing pieces too.
Someone is going to be the odd man out of this group. And last year we saw that the 11th man in the rotation still played a decent amount. Be Ja'Kai Howard, but like you said, like that person on paper right now is a top 60 recruit in the country one of the 15 best players you've ever signed, and a dude who has had a crazy last few months on the circuit and an all-star stuff. I mean, he's been really, really good. That's another interesting spot. Like him slash Chris Moore. What does that sort of look like? But again, we're having these like nitpicky conversations about like who's going to get the extra rotation a game at the bottom of the wing rotation. I just think they're in such a good spot elsewhere. It was interesting. We haven't even talked about Janai Broom. They're returning All-American, but we talk about him all the time. It was interesting. This was the first time last week that Bruce Pearl talked about him coming back. First time we had gotten to speak with him since then. And sort of the overarching theme of this, Jason, as we're now done, we're done with this whole transfer craziness the past couple months has been, he said, hey, it was, first of all, transfer portal was never an option for Janai Broom. It was either turn pro or come back to Auburn. And Bruce said, look, he came back to Auburn. We felt like the collective treated him very fairly. And then he made another comment about wanting to prioritize the players that had already shown value. He sort of made a joke saying, evaluation has a different meaning now because that value part of it is different. Sort of referencing like they put a priority on their returning guys this year. Not everybody in college basketball is going to do that. And so, look, this is not an NIL conversation of like, where the money is being put or whatever, but I just think there is some important context there. And look, there's a lot of things that you and I hear about too that goes on behind the scenes in terms of NIL craziness. And we haven't even talked about the House decision. Like that's going to be crazy, but there's a lot of factors at play nowadays when you're building a college basketball roster. But I think at the end of the day, Bruce Pearl and his staff said, let's make sure our All-American is taken care of. Let's make sure our other two returning starters are taken care of. And the guys who proved themselves to be really good players on a team that won 27 games, won an SEC tournament championship last year, and then kind of move on and go into the transfer portal. And they still ended up getting some pieces who feel like they fit the roster really well.
Yeah, I think that's the key. Taking care of the guys that the guys that you can trust, that you know exactly what you're going to get from. That's the starting point. And for this team, that's a pretty good starting point. When you talk about Janai Broom, Dylan Cardwell, obviously we mentioned Chris Moore, but when you talk about Denver Jones, Chad Baker-Mazara, I mean, that's a good group to start with. You know exactly what you're getting. They've been there, done that. And so I think that's the key part of this is that you brought back those pieces to build this team around.
So now we will go into they'll begin winter workouts this week. Or excuse me, not winter workouts. They'll begin summer workouts this week after Memorial Day here. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, this will be a really interesting offseason for them. But you look around and people nationally and assessing the rest of the league, it's pretty well established that Auburn has one of the better rosters in the SEC. And it's just sort of ho-hum at this point that this is what Bruce Pearl and his staff do every offseason, and even with some parts of the offseason where it felt like they came up short in different areas. I mean, our Isaac Trotter for 24/7 put out his SEC power rankings, and he had Auburn number 1 right now, just sort of saying, hey, Alabama's really, really talented and brought in a ton of good players, but Bruce Pearl has sort of proven he can do this thing with this kind of lineup before. And so should be another season of high expectations for Auburn. Obviously, the backcourt is such a big part of that. They felt like guard play needed to be because that in the tournament, it's just look, a lot of things held them back against Yale. But this past season was something where they felt like point guard was really inconsistent. Now you're sort of hoping that this is, I mean, I think this can be one of their more well-rounded backcourts in the last few years in terms of having lots of different types of guys.
Yeah. And then you think about, the possibilities early in the year to go out and kind of establish yourself. When you think about going to Maui, where you have, Dayton, Iowa State, Memphis. Oh yeah, Michigan State. Oh yeah, North Carolina. Oh yeah, UConn. I mean, like potentially you could play, Michigan State, North Carolina, UConn on 3 consecutive days.
Yep.
Those are the types of opportunities. We saw it a few years ago, how it impacted things for a team. I think this team is going to really benefit from, that early schedule, non-conference schedule. It's going to be a challenging one by the time the dust settles on it. But I think it's going to be really good for this team.
Yeah, by the way, Bruce said this is going to be their most challenging non-con they've ever had. So be on the lookout for what that means with some other matchups potentially. But a lot of that does come from Maui because that is just that's a disgusting field, and it'll tell them a lot early in the season. Also, by the way, I was thinking about this the other day that I was excited to most likely hear Bill Walton on those games in Maui. Bill Walton passed away today on Monday, so rest in peace to somebody who nobody else did it like that on in terms of broadcasting. So definitely a big loss for the world of basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. No, one that I'd readily admit wasn't my favorite, but it wasn't because of his lack of passion for the game. So, the guy that brought it and lived it and loved it, and you know what? It's I don't know. It's kind of fitting that the day after the last Pac-12 official Pac-12 event, um, that Bill Walton passed away because he was the champion of the conference of champions, as he called it, over and over again. And so, yeah, huge loss for basketball, pop culture, Grateful Dead, all of the above.
Yeah, and it's always great too when you see immediately after the fact just overflowing with positive stories and everybody having great things to say. Jason, we'll close out here. You have been all over the run here in the postseason for both Auburn men's and women's golf. Men's golf still chugging along here on Monday. Tell us a little bit about the latest with them in the NCAA tournament, what they need to do here in the next couple days to keep rolling, and what the results have been so far.
Yeah, they call it the longest day in golf. It used to be, because of PGA Tour qualifying school, they call it the longest day. Well, Tuesday is the longest day in NCAA men's golf and women's golf. It's the potential for 36 holes. So it's quarterfinal and semifinal of match play. Auburn will take on Virginia in the opening in the quarters. Auburn ended up being the 6th seed. Has not played its best golf. Jackson Coyven finished one shot out of the individual championship, and the freshman just continues to play well. But they haven't gone out and gone low, and not many people have on this course either. La Costa, it's playing really tough. This is a place where about 25 years ago or so, was one of the places that Tiger won one of his first big tournaments. The Tournament of Champions. They beat Tom Lehman there. I remember it's been redone since then, but it's talked to Nick Kleinard after the first round. He said, "Look, this is a major championship style." He said they could host a U.S. Amateur here right now. It's firm, it's fast, and you got to land it in the right spots. You see, watch it. If you've seen any of the coverage last couple of days, you see that they're hitting wedges in, the ball still bouncing 25, 30 feet. So for this Auburn team, can they make those adjustments? But this has been a really good match play team. Obviously, just won the SEC championship in match play. They won match play earlier, the fall invitational match play. They beat Vanderbilt in both of those. Vanderbilt's still in it. Vandy is the 2 seed in this one. Illinois ran away with the individual and stroke play championship. They won by 16 shots. But I think it's only once in the last 10 years has the team that won the individual stroke play championship gone on to win match play and win the national championship. So for Auburn, do what you had to do. Put yourself in a position, and this is a team that I think they believe when they get to match play is the best team in the country, and now they'll have a chance to back that up. Tuesday, I think around noon or so Central Time would be kind of when those first matches tee off, and then it'll go till pretty late in the day. So we'll see if they can make it through, and if they do, the championship match would be on Wednesday. So good luck to Nick Kleinert and that group, and see if they can pull it through.
Yeah, and if you guys can't keep up tomorrow afternoon or moving forward during the day, like I said, auburnundercover.com. Jason has had immediate coverage of all that stuff. Nick Kleinert comments right after the fact as well, and in reaction on that front. And so be sure to head over there to keep up with the Tigers as they're obviously trying to make a run for it here, facing off tomorrow in the Elite Eight. And so Thank you guys so much for joining us today on this edition of the Auburn Undercover podcast. Hope everybody enjoyed it. If you did, go leave us a 5-star review. That is the number one thing that helps us out on Apple, Spotify, wherever you find it. Bumper Music, Beats by Mordecai, Twitter, SoundCloud, and Instagram is where you guys can find him. Until the next episode, which we should have a couple more this week. So looking forward to that with you guys. We will talk to you all later. Everybody have a great rest of your week.